everyone. Welcome back to the Spirit of Prophecy podcast. Appreciate you joining me today. I am very excited about a discussion been wanting to have for a long time. I have Brother Jon Kammeraad on the program, and he is a filmmaker. He does a lot of stuff on Baptist history, and this is a subject that I've been wanting to get into more just personally and reading things, but also just conversations on the program. I love Baptist history, and I think it's important. Several years ago, I read some books on Baptist history, but I've kind of gotten away from it. And so I figured doing some podcasts on this subject, it would help kind of get me back to looking into it. But also, there's a lot of criticism out there towards certain resources in Baptist history. And I honestly don't know as much as I should about these things. And so a while back, I had talked to Pastor Mac Woody, who I've had on the program a few times, and always enjoy the conversations I've had with him. Those have mostly been about prophecy, but I had talked to him about possibly doing something on Baptist history, and he mentioned his son-in-law, and I've been watching some of his videos that he has. I've got links to his websites in the description and a YouTube channel, and I would encourage you to go check out what he has going on in some of his videos. And after watching some of the trailers and things, I'm definitely planning on getting some of these videos and watching them. Very interested. And so, Brother Jon, it is good to have you on the program today. Just go ahead and tell everyone a little bit about yourself and your ministry.
All right. So kind of where to begin. I'm up north, way up north, Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I go to Shiloh Baptist Church, which is where Shiloh Films originally began. God has put in my heart from a very young age. I've made movies all my life as a kid. Was constantly stealing my dad's camera out of his closet and making little movies. And it's just something that has always drawn me. And long short of it is that God has kind of guided us through the years into this ministry, which is Shiloh Films, which was born out of a story that I had heard that completely shocked me concerning American history. And so for the past almost 20 years, we've been working toward making these films. But most recently, the site that you have pulled up there is the American Providence Foundation, which is a brand new foundation that we just started. And this is kind of reaching where Shiloh Films cannot. Shiloh Films is media-based video, which is huge for teaching, absolutely huge. But what this is doing is allowing us to extend beyond just the media portion and in providing materials to churches, information to churches, because back when we first started Shiloh Films, it was really great stories that we should preserve. That's kind of the viewpoint. But as America has gone over the past 20 years, I can see the relevance. Very relevant, our heritages, and honestly, more importantly, is it's a forgotten history. Not only are we experiencing a historical rewrite in our nation's history right now, you can turn on the media, turn on the news, listen to anybody that is maybe leftist leaning. There is a rewrite of an attempted rewrite of our heritage. But to be honest, the most important, essential elements of our nation's history have already been forgotten. And so over the past, really since COVID, God has kind of stirred in our hearts to move towards maybe a little bit more of a philosophical approach. And I think that's where it needs to be, is philosophy and not so much theology. I know that you're really theologically heavy. Not that that's not important. That's not what I'm getting at. But as a country, we're losing our philosophy, our nation's philosophy in a massive way. And we have got, if you look at history, you can see in every generation, there were those that were there to defend it. And they were usually God's people. Mm-hmm. But we're not really in any shape right now to be able to do that. If we don't know our real history, we're in a lot of trouble. We're sunk.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting what you say too, because yes, in my world, we're all about theology, but at the same time, in the Great Commission, Jesus told his disciples, to teach all nations. They were to teach them all things that he commanded. And in the scriptures, there are principles for government that we can learn from. And I was listening to a debate not too long ago, and one of the questions that was asked, it was a post-millennialist versus an amillennialist. And the post-millennialist basically asked the question, if there were to be a revival in this nation, and if, our government was to turn towards Christianity, and they came to you and they're like, okay, so then what do we need to change? Would you even be ready to answer that question? And the reality is, I don't think most Christians, they've not really thought through political things.
Yeah.
And we've been having some discussions about that, private. I haven't done it online, but like private discussions about, what does a Christian nation look like? Where would we draw lines on certain things? And one of the things that I think is interesting when you look at the old timers is they were forward thinking people. They thought
Mm.
generations ahead. And in our society, in our culture, we don't do that, especially in the independent fundamental Baptist world, where everybody's pre-tribulational. Everyone's planning for the rapture to come in their lifetime. Nobody's planning on setting things up for the next generation. We're all planning on the Antichrist taking over, and therefore we're just kind of letting the government just go nuts
Yeah.
on us. I think all that's wrong. What for people watching, if you thought what he said might seem a little critical, I think it was, but I also think it's very deserving. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, I think, well, you're right. I think we have a passive view, and I think that's detrimental, because you can't say, I mean, there have been darker ages than what we live in now, but we think everything revolves around our generation. When really we just need to be diligent in our duties in our generation. That is looking forward, right? Preparing the future, but always have a read on the past as well. Well,
Yes.
we got to know where we come from. It's so important, and I don't mean the traditional history of Washington, Jefferson and Adams. That's not what I'm referring to. There's a true blue. I don't want to say church. Well, it's providential. That's what we call it, the American Providence Foundation. God's finger has been moving through this country since its origin.
Mm-hmm.
And most of that history, man, is not remembered.
Mm-hmm.
And it should be heralded. Like this should be the history that everyone knows. And a lot of like what you deal with. I don't know. I think that we spend a lot of time. I don't want to word this. We spend a lot of time in a theological world and less in a philosophical world, and that is the danger. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that I don't mean that in like theology is not important, so don't misunderstand me. But what I am saying is there's a philosophical way of viewing this country, viewing church, as far as what you and I believe. We completely disagree. I'm not saying we do that. We might disagree on a lot of things. Mm-hmm. Even if you and I intensely agree on things, we're going to find something that we disagree on. And so there is a way of viewing that, and that is that we don't necessarily have to draw the line in the sand and point our muskets at each other.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's the principle that's guided the country. That's the principle that's guided our country from the beginning. And that was, that's half the issue. But anyway, the point is this, is that type of philosophy is embedded and ingrained in our heritage and in our people. And that's what has to be restored. It has to be.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And just for everybody watching this too, I just want to point out that, I invited Brother Jon to come on the program. I don't know a ton about what you believe on everything. I've had the conversations with your father-in-law that I've always enjoyed very much. And even in areas where I would say I'm in disagreement with him, I wouldn't say I'm strongly in disagreement with him. I am fascinated with what he has to say, and I've learned a lot. There's things that he's corrected me on. Other things I'm not sure if I'm right. I'm not sure who's wrong yet. And mm-hmm. I absolutely love talking to him. He emails me a lot of things. And so what I find fascinating about your father-in-law is he does have a different mindset than people from my world in many ways. Again, and I'm
Mhm.
I'm from the dispensational world. We're all planning on the Antichrist taking over any day now, right? And that's kind of how we are. And so it affects how we look at a lot of different things. And when you talk to people of different persuasions, it's I don't know. I like to just kind of soak it in, think through all of it. And so just for people watching too, if something comes up and where he has a different position, I'm not here to debate you today. I'm not here to correct you in anything. I'm genuinely interested in what you have to say. But before we kind of get into some of those
Yeah.
historical things and where it leads, what are some I'd like for you to maybe tell our audience about some of your past projects that you've done that maybe they could check out, or then also any future projects that you're planning on.
Yeah. Okay, so Shiloh Films started in 2007, and we started to make our first film, which is As with Roses. Now it was our very first no budget, low budget film. I don't even know if that's available anymore on our site, but um, we'll probably end up releasing it for free. So if you go to our YouTube channel, which is I don't even use find Shiloh Films, or if you go to shilohfilms.org, the link is there. But we started doing the As with Roses was our first movie that we made, and so that deals with the whipping of Obadiah Holmes there in Boston, back in the 1600s. I won't say the date because I'll get it wrong and I'll hate myself for it. But we moved on after that. We moved into the Over Mountain Men. Yeah, so this is our list of some of our projects. We moved into a series called The Over Mountain Men, which is dealing with the Sandy Creek. I would call it a Sandy Creek awakening. And what stemmed out of that was the Regulator movement, and ends up at Kings Mountain. So it's a Revolutionary War era movie series. It's a trilogy. And then we did other things such as Trial of Your Faith. We finished up in 2022 a movie called The Red Herring. And so what we've been burdened by over the past several years was our country. Again, I said that since COVID, right? COVID really shocked everyone. We saw a lot of things that we shouldn't have seen, and we didn't know what to do with a lot of that stuff. And I think our heritage can help us figure that out, what to do with those types of scenarios. But that kind of led us down a trail of maybe retelling our nation's history through documentary, because that's kind of people love documentaries. And so I'll give it kind of in a nutshell. We're praying about where should we begin? What is the first story we should tell in our nation's history? And my wife and I had been praying about this for some time, and then we came to this conclusion. And I love this story, but we came to this conclusion that we need to start obviously at the beginning, which is New England. We need to go back to the very beginning. And so we decided this, okay? And this is just between her and I. And the next day I get a call from a fella by the name of Keith Hoover. And Keith is a guy that I met, oddly enough, I met him on another history tour, I don't know, 15 years before this. And he said, he calls me up and he's like, "Hey, John, we haven't talked in a while. And I'm wondering, would you come with me to New England to film our upcoming tour?" And it was like that fast. It was like the day after. Like, this wasn't confirmation that God wanted us to go do this. I don't know what was. So we ventured out and we started to film his tour with him. And that tour has now turned into something way bigger than just filming the tour. It's turned into sort of a documentary series on the origin of America. Yes, we have aspects of his tour in there, sites, locations. You can kind of see all these things. But what we did is we followed up with a podcast series, as well as obviously the editing of everything. We take you in this series, we take you along the origin of American liberty. And what I mean by that is we have to dismantle, and this is true. I believe this in my heart of hearts. We got to dismantle to a degree the origin of American liberty. If I asked you what is the story? What's the first story in your mind? Really, just based on and this isn't meant to criticize. I'm just going to ask you, what is the first story that comes to your mind when it comes to American liberty?
For me, it's whenever the Danbury Baptists, reached out to Thomas Jefferson and all that. That's the story I hear all the time.
Sure.
So
I guess
that
enough.
would be the first one. There's another story. It's been a long time, but I remember hearing about the there's a letter that was written, that it's been so long I forgot these things, but there was a letter that was written by a man who was in prison, that a lot of the wording in there was very similar to some of the things that you see, in Thomas Jefferson's letter. And
Yes.
from what I was told, that they think that it was, they believe it was Baptists that influenced much of what was in our Bill of Rights and with freedom of speech and all that. But I can't remember. I can't remember
anonymous
the name.
prisoner at Newgate is. I think
That's why I can't remember his name. He was anonymous.
Yeah, fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll give you more of a general sense. I think too is that general history. What I learned growing up, pilgrims.
Mm-hmm.
Pilgrims came to America, gave us religious liberty.
Mm-hmm.
And so this isn't a slam, and I mean that sincerely, but that's not true. It can't be true,
right.
Especially when you look at their compact. Look at their compact. They pay oaths to the king. But what we do in this documentary series is we have to first dismantle how we think that we got liberty. So in episode 1, we establish through the monument out in Plymouth. I don't know if you've seen the monument. It's a gigantic statue. It has several points in it, and it basically draws the map to liberty. Have you seen this? Kirk Cameron did a movie on it way back when called Monumental. Really powerful statue. It should be our country's Statue of Liberty. So we kind of, in episode 1, we break down what that statue is telling us, and we kind of take you through the history of the origin of the country. Episode 2, we dismantle the Pilgrims because they didn't give us religious liberty. They paid homage to the king, number 1, but also they persecuted.
Mm-hmm.
That's an issue.
Yeah, that's why I knew it wasn't the Pilgrims. I knew that much.
Yeah. Well, again, in a general sense, that was my understanding growing up, which is why some of this stuff,
right. Yeah, that was mine too.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so, okay, so if that's not the case, then we got to figure out, where did religious liberty actually begin? And so that's kind of what the series is meant to do. It's meant to dismantle, explain how liberty is formed in a nation. In episode 2, we dismantle a nation's understanding of history and really teach you from that point on how we got to religious liberty. So that we're 2 episodes in. I think we're gonna have 5 or 6. I think we're in for 6 episodes when all is said and done. So we're on episode 3 right now. That's
awesome. I watched the trailer right before this of the red herring, which looked very interesting. I definitely want to check that out. Is that available online, or do you have to go on your website to purchase the film?
Yeah, that's a digital. You can get that digitally as well. That's on our site. It's an allegorical view from a very personal story that I had went through at that point in my life.
Okay, yeah, I thought that looked very intriguing. And then when I saw Pastor Woody on there, I got real excited. I was like, oh yeah, I'm watching that one.
Check out his acting abilities.
Yes.
Yeah. That's a film basically about men leaving the ministry. And I think, to be honest with you, anybody that might watch this and go view it later, I get hit and mix reactions on it, because I think that it's so tailored towards people that have been hurt, maybe by someone that had looked up to in the ministry, right? A pastor that had left the ministry, and leaves you wondering what's true and what's not when he didn't even hold that closely. So anyway, it's based on the book of Proverbs, but it has everything to do with the young man becoming the man of understanding. That's sort of the idea of the
okay.
It's allegorical.
I'll ask you this too. One of the things I enjoy doing on the program, it's not been my most popular thing in the program, but ultimately I do what I enjoy on this program. I love reviewing documentaries. And do you have one in particular that you would like for me to do?
As far as from our selection?
Yes.
Man, I'll give you that link to that episode 1 I'll give you a link to both episodes, episode 1 and 2, so you can kind of see where we're heading for the Call to New England, our newest one.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that would, since you already know some of this history, I think that's good. Yeah. Anyone that doesn't know the history, there's so much in there, man. There's so much in there.
Okay. Yeah. No, send that to me, and I'll do a review on those. And I enjoy doing those. I like watching them too. So
when you watch that, you'll see myself and you'll see another man. I told you about Keith Huber. He's the guy that kind of invited me on that tour, and we got to work together. We've been working together ever since. I mean, we're really, he'd be one that might be worthy having on your podcast as well, because he's maybe even as a follow-up to that, because that guy is he's a brain, man. He's got such a he's got a good mind for
Yeah.
everything
Now,
that we're doing.
I hear a lot of pastors refer to going on these Baptist history tours.
Yeah.
Are there a lot of people that do those, or I hear them referred to? I just don't know of any in particular or what they're like. But do you
Yeah.
guys host anything like that or participate in anything like
That's
that?
that's part of where we're going. So the American Providence Foundation is a part of that. So the Shiloh Films is only movies. So the American Providence Foundation, one of the things we'd like to do is host annual meetings, but also host annual tours or semi-annual. But Keith Hoover is the one that has done a ton of these. He does tours constantly. And there's, I don't know what your thoughts are when you hear tour, like, I don't know. But there is something that happens when you walk the soil. It's one thing to hear someone tell you a story. It's another thing completely to stand on the ground where it happened. And so that is something. There's not a lot of groups doing that, but I've been on a handful of tours, and the one that Keith invited us on, to me, was the best because it had a theme, right? It took your mind through a theme, to help you understand some more essential foundational truths as opposed to just a list of things. Here's this happened, this happened, this happened. That's boring history. But when history is applicable, okay, now you have my attention. And so that's what his tour does. So yeah, there are tours out there. And if you sign up, if you go to AmericanProvidenceFoundation.com and you sign up, whenever the next tour is, you'll be notified and get a video on it and all that good stuff. So,
okay. Yeah. So, when it comes to Baptist history, I mean, it does seem to be a fact that a lot of Baptists know very little about, Baptist history. Why do you think it's important for us to remember our history and our heritage?
There's a lot of value in our history. I think one of the most essential things, I think, right now, especially when dealing with with your world, I think that you, just in the short time you and I have been talking, I feel I see a very historic Baptist in your way of thinking, which is I'll hear all sides. And I think that's one of the things that's missing, right? We fight over theology and don't rejoice over the fact that we have our own consciences and we owe that to God and God alone. So we can disagree, but who am I to point my finger at you and tell you you're wrong when I'm probably wrong on 100 different things? Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things for sure that we're missing. But also, American history, I would say, we've been using the term providential history, God's providence. It's Baptist history. You can look at God's providence and see he used Baptist for everything, but you can't only say Baptist, because then you got to throw out George Whitefield. Mm-hmm. And George Whitefield was a massive piece in this story. Mm-hmm. But I think the benefit that Baptist history provides to us today is ultimately, when you're looking at our heritage, you see I will use the term, an evolution of conscience. We come to fuller understanding. When the world, and back in America's beginning, the world was under a very specific theological mindset. And that was a part of your state, right? So you could not leave the standing orders religion. Otherwise you are a dissenter, right? But you have, even in the Pilgrims, to their credit, their pastor, John Robinson, which we deal with in episode 2, he can't go over with them, but he sends his people over to America and says, and I'm paraphrasing, we haven't discovered all the truth that is in God's word, because he had just come out of the state religion. They were brainwashed by everything that has come before, which we all are. But he said, we haven't discovered all the truth that there is to discover. You need to continually search for truth, find out where you're wrong and correct it. And he kind of throws out Calvin and Luther. He says, they didn't even come all the way to truth. There's more truth that God will reveal to you if you let him. And that's his cry to them. They don't adhere to that. But I think that's one of the principles that is a thread that runs through our heritage. Is you constantly have a people struggling with theology. We don't know, and we get stuck in becoming a parrot for everything that has come before us. And we're no longer, and we become the authority on everything, when ultimately you need humility. You need to hear all sides. You need to pray and ask God to kind of continually guide you in truth, and he'll do that That's what his promises are. We're supposed to keep digging, right?
Now
But
that's fascinating to me that that was a mentality back
yeah,
then, because for one, I completely agree with that. Two, I think it's consistent with several things we see in the book of Acts, things we see even how prophecy is going to unfold. We see in the book of Acts, we have this mentality that religion and truth is just going to become more and more corrupted as time goes on. But the
mm-hmm.
thing is, those things they warned about, waxing worse and worse, started back in that day. So obviously, it's not
Right,
referring to everything. And even in the book of Acts, there are many major flaws you can see in that early church. For one, they weren't letting Gentiles in, they're still doing the things of the temple. Over time, God revealed the truths that those things were no longer necessary, and they figured it out. And when you look at historically, how in many places the world has gotten better. I mean,
mm-hmm.
I would rather be living in the 21st century than any other century.
Right,
And I believe a lot of that is due to truth getting out there. But I personally think our just obsession in the last couple generations with Bible prophecy, in the Antichrist coming, the one world government, it's just got us so focused on all the negative that
yeah,
we're still missing the fact there's a lot of positive going on, and we have seen many great things. And I've even heard dispensational guys say, "I'm glad that the previous generations didn't have our attitude, yeah, of doom and gloom." And
yeah,
what I'm seeing today from Baptists is, people like myself, I feel like I am being loyal to the previous generations and being thankful for them, but sometimes you see major flaws that, like, hey, this was a problem. This was not scriptural. And then we've got like your leaders in fundamentalism today. Don't you dare, do anything different than those people. And I think that attitude is for sure inconsistent with the Bible. But
yeah,
I find that interesting. You're basically telling me that's inconsistent with Baptist history too.
yeah, 100%. No, 100%. Because you can't. And so here's the thing: is okay. We call it Baptist history, and this is the term. I struggled with that for a long time because literally of the guys that would say it.
Right.
They were, and I don't want to sound utopian in this, but they were so. I was right, closed-minded on all their theology, which is fine. You should protect your theology, that which convicts you. You should, 100%. But if you're going to tie it to theology, you can't even tie yourself to half the guys we're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like if you're going to, what do you do with if you're not Calvinist? What do you do with Calvinism?
Mm-hmm.
This was a serious thing. Some of them, many of them came to the truth over a period of time, right? But they struggled with infant baptism. It was a huge struggle.
Yep.
We can judge them, right, as if we're all knowing and we've come to the final place, which is called truth. But realistically, these guys struggle with various things that were of their generation, things that were leftovers from their previous religion they'd come out of. And so they're struggling. Isaac Backus, I don't even know anything about Isaac Backus, but he got up in front of his church, like, I don't know how many, it was like 3 or 4 weeks, maybe even up to 6 weeks in a row, and bounced back and forth whether or not infant baptism was legitimate or if we should do away with it. And his congregation lost a lot of faith in him in that time, but he ultimately came to the understanding of immersion through believers baptism. So we get, I think there's a pride in us.
Yes.
And we're like, we're right all the time. We're
yes.
right. I don't need to fix this.
Yes, we don't realize how influenced we are by the generation that we're living in, even though we speak against it all the time. For example, cancel culture is huge. And so one of the things that we're doing is we are often applying, I call this out all the time, we apply today's standards on certain things to previous generations. And so when we had, so for example, in the slavery era, I think that was a cultural problem. I think that was a cultural flaw that we had. But I also believe there were good people within that culture who loved the Lord, who participated in a sin of that time. And so to me, to to judge those people on today's standard, I think is wrong. You mentioned the Calvinists and things too. Yeah, these people, many of these people who had some of these doctrinal flaws, they were in places where the word of God was not as available as it is to us today, where there
Mhm.
was great government control over things. And to me, it's amazing they had the truth that they did, considering the system that they were under. And so, um,
Yeah.
I think people on my side are wrong when they'll just kind of write off some of these people because of some of these flaws. But I also think too, we've got another group of people today, your a lot of your reform types that they feel like the more they align with the people of old, the more right they are. And it's like, well, wait a minute, those people had some pretty messed up ideas back
Yeah.
then too. Why can't we build on certain things they gave us? So yeah, Martin Luther, he figured out, that, and it influenced a lot of people, that the just shall live by faith, and that was good. But yeah, he had a lot of baggage, but you know what? That's good that he was able to influence some people away from
Yeah.
Catholicism. And and I know there was people out there that already had that figured out, but again, we never take those things in consideration. We look at all these past generations as if they were living today, as if they had the resources of today and all the knowledge of today, and they didn't.
Right.
So I just think that's a totally wrong attitude. I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. No, it is 100%. It is, but that's one thing I read recently that it really stuck with me was the most dangerous thing for any generation is inherited sincerity, and that is true. We
Mhm.
can be the most sincere about the things that we've inherited, but have we ever stopped to question some of what we believe?
Right. Hmm.
Right? Have we ever challenged it? I think this is really important. And most of the time they're going to say, well, they'll be accused of being too liberal or whatever.
Hmm.
But no, what you actually are saying is I'm okay with that. I'm wrong on things. It's okay to be wrong.
Hmm.
You know, um, and I think if you can, when you look back, especially when it comes to history, if you try, any guy that says, "Oh, we promote Baptist history, we promote Baptist history," tether your theology to them. See if you can, like, what is it that actually transfers when you say this is our heritage? What is it that makes it yours? Specifically,
Hmm.
what is it that makes it yours? Because if you can't tie, if you're doing a theological Baptist debate, you're going to run up short. You're not going to be able to. Your history is so minuscule. You're going to find that every generation is constantly trying to find truth, constantly development. And if you think you've arrived, and you look back, with a pointed finger at anybody that didn't agree with you theologically, you're on a ship all of your own. You can't even tether yourself to this. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. But ultimately, it's God's heritage, and I think that everyone that is, like you mentioned, Luther, Calvin, whether or not you like these men and whether you can tether them to persecution, absolutely you can. There's no denying that. But can you question their sincerity? That's something you can't really question. You can't question their
Hmm.
sincerity. You don't know where they were at,
Right.
and I think that's the you look at someone like George Whitefield. If we didn't have a George Whitefield, we don't have a Revolutionary War, and I believe that with all my heart. If we don't have a George Whitefield, we don't have any of the moving towards an America that we understand today.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah. And
so
and I guess people, they kind of get triggered sometimes when you mention some of these people because, like, in the independent fundamental Baptist world, they're constantly name dropping. And when they do, that's kind of their way of associating themselves with that person. I've taken up their mantle. I preach exactly what they
yeah,
preach. And, when I do stuff like that, especially with like a Martin Luther, obviously, I'm well aware of many of the massive flaws that he had, but at the same time, I don't think it makes sense to like deny the cultural impact that he
mhm,
had. That in some ways, had a positive thing, attached to it. And so, I think that overall, certain places had some good developments that often were led with some pretty flawed people. And so the thing is, I think it's okay to be happy with some good that came out of a movement, but at the same time, we don't have to be loyal to them to where we embrace all their flaws. We can point them
right,
out, we can call it out, and be thankful for whatever good happened. And so even today, like in recently, like with the death of Charlie Kirk, I think that man had a positive impact in certain areas. I have no problem admitting that. I also have no problem admitting some of the serious flaws, that he had as well too. And me being thankful for maybe something positive that he did in an area, that's not me embracing everything about the guy. But in our cancel culture mentality we have, you got to just be either all for somebody or all against somebody. And I just don't think you can be consistent with that. And so,
No, you
so
can't.
with, so when it comes to like historical figures though, um, what are some names that you think it's important that we remember? If there are some people wanting to know more about this history, who are some people they should look into?
I would say start at the beginning. You can go back to the anonymous prisoner, right? You can go all the way back to Europe and find some of the. But I think what we're looking at when we for benefits, and again, we're taking theology and we're going to put it on a shelf because, like I said, you can't tether yourself to all these guys theologically anyway. So let's talk
Right.
philosophy. I would highly recommend starting with Roger Williams
Mm-hmm.
and John Clark. Those two. That's the origin. Roger Williams started I would call Roger Williams, and I have called Roger Williams the very first American.
Hmm.
And there's a reason for that. There's a strong reason for that. There is.
Didn't he start the very first Baptist church in America too?
I would disagree. Now we're talking theology. I would disagree with that, and that is you're not incorrect.
Okay.
That is the banner that they give him. Like
Mm-hmm.
But if you study that, he started it. He said this ain't right doctrinally. He left it. The church disbands, I think, and after like 4 years, and then they come back together and they say that's still the church he started. No, I would say the First Baptist Church is by John Clark, but that's the theological conversation. But philosophically, you look at these guys as how they set up Rhode Island. Rhode Island's the very first, I would call it the very first American colony. And when I say that, let me just describe that because I don't want to get killed on this. But if I'm going to ask you this, what is an American? What is an American? If I ask you, could you answer that and think about
what is an American?
What is an American?
I guess it's a citizen, of a nation under the authority of the Constitution.
Okay. So let me just say this way. If let's say World War II unfolded in a completely different way. 1940s Germany takes over the United States. It keeps the name America. Is that American? Is that an American nation as you would understand what an American nation is?
No, not if we had a new system of government.
Right. So there is a philosophical aspect to what being an American is.
Right.
Okay, so that's the lens we got to look at everything with. So now let's take that lens and let's throw it on our history too. So now we can really understand, we can see the conscience development of a nation. But that conscience development absolutely starts in Rhode Island. And what Roger Williams does, he sets up the first, I would call it the first American colony, the first free colony, where Jew, Turk, pagan, anyone that he says, anybody that wants to be free and worship according to their conscience, which is huge, can come here and be free. No other colony did that. Boston didn't do that. Virginia didn't do that. Plymouth didn't do that. In fact, they all persecuted, some of them to death, some of them just banishments. But Roger Williams, philosophically, is a guy we want to look at. You can look at him wobbling on the hub in his life, but we all change in life and we try to figure these things out. But anyway, my point is Roger Williams, John Clark is a good starting point. And moving from there, as the nation develops over the course of the next 100 years, you're going to get guys. We talk about Adams, Jefferson, Washington. There are a couple guys, 3 guys that I can think of off the top of my head is Samuel Stillman, Isaac Backus, and John Leland. And these guys are pastors. Okay, they're pastors that are getting in the political circuit, and they're trying to change the future of the country because the way the framers and founders were going to set up their country was going to be no different than the old. We're still going to have a religion, but that religion was going to be free according to the state. So your state, wherever state you're in, would choose, this is a Catholic state because the majority is Catholic, whatever it might be. That's how that was going to set up. And so they would tolerate other religions. And that was the word that some of these guys had an issue with. Toleration is not liberty.
Mm-hmm.
Tolerate us. So that's huge. That's huge. But those are several men that I would look at sincerely when it comes to your philosophy and politics. Oh, it's so important. We have this idea of separation of church and state, and it's not right. The wall of separation, I think that we get that backwards and think we're not allowed to get into politics as people, as pastors, as Christians. But you're citizens of your own country. It's all relevant. So our history will prove that and bear record of that. That these guys got involved politically, turned the tide of the country, and we have religious liberty because of them. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's a few of the ones I would look at closely from a liberty standpoint.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and I've read a lot of things too showing the influence of Baptists, on the religious liberty, and I believe in that. But at the same time too, a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, when they express religious liberty, that was not supposed to be open to Jews, Muslims, maybe even Catholics. Were they freedom of religion absolutists, or do you think it was assumed, just amongst the different Christian denominations?
I think it was a liberty-based, okay, so theologically free. I would say that's what they're referring to. When it comes to I keep throwing the word philosophical mindset of this whole thing, that comes from our Declaration of Independence, and that has to be adhered to. So you can't just come in and create the Middle East in America. You have to abide by our philosophies, right, which are Christian, by the way,
right?
Very Christian philosophy. And so I think that's one of the. I don't think they had been persecuted. Put yourself in their shoes. They had been persecuted for thinking differently, that they unified more or less with these other religions than anything else, because I just want to be free, man. I want to worship according to my conscience. And so, yeah, I think they were totally free, not in the sense of liberty, not libertine. Don't come over here and bring your philosophies over.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's how we should treat each other. But go ahead.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah. Cause I agree that, obviously every nation has civil laws against, things like murder, stealing, and all that. We're just honest enough to admit that we get those principles from the scriptures, where, and so we would consider that those Christian, beliefs and a Christian philosophy. And so if you can come over here and be a Muslim and not violate those things, then you'll be fine. But
yeah, 100%. And Muslim's a big term right now, right? Because that's a theological difference. And we went to are you familiar with what's going on in Dearborn, Michigan?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So they had a politician just recently get up and say, we're going to march through Dearborn and we're going to, say no Sharia law. Are you aware of that event?
I didn't hear about that event, but I've been hearing about a lot of the conflict going on there, and I've seen some of the quotes from their Muslim mayor and all that.
Yeah, that's in our own state. We went. Keith is from Michigan as well. Him and I went to this event in Dearborn, and it was sketchy to say the least.
I'll bet. Mm-hmm.
But we went to the event in Dearborn, and because we're like, let's see what this is all about. We're going as journalists. We're not going to go as like those that are marching through, but we want to figure out exactly what's going on in Dearborn. So we actually went. Here's the thing. Here's the part where we can watch media and immediately just caricature people. Now, this isn't a defense in philosophy. This isn't a defense in their theology, but it is a defense for the truth. And that as we went to Dearborn, man, we got there and it was like, we parked in this parking lot for sure. Everyone's Muslim, right? You go to the grocery store, it's like, there's an English word and a Muslim word to label the grocery store, right? We walking around, it's, they have the ladies, head to toe, in their covering, right? So anyway, we go to this event, and the first thing we do is we come across the Antifa group, which was hiding behind a building. And we just happened to walk up on these guys, and they were cold. Like, we were filming the whole thing. And they're so cold toward us. And I thought, this is what we're going to get. This is what we're going to walk into. We didn't know they were Antifa at the time. But they were cold. They wouldn't tell us where anything was going on. We went around to where the event was happening. We met a couple of police officers that were Muslims and friendly, very friendly. We go through this whole event, and things start to really escalate. They escalate when Antifa gets involved, because they're saying the Palestinian from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, advocating for the murder of Jews. And then you have there's another guy that's there, and if you look him up, Jake J. Sixer. I don't know if have you heard of this guy?
Mm-mm.
He was just in, I forget exactly where it was. He was just in, maybe might have been Minneapolis, and he was getting almost torn apart limb from limb by a crowd. This guy was just but that's what he's aiming for. So we got to see two groups firsthand really escalate the scenario, which outside of the chaos was actually Muslims and Christians talking. True. I was there. And so media reported all the chaos. The cameras were following around this chaotic group. This guy's got a Quran, and he's beating it with bacon, and he's dropping his crucifix. This guy drops his crucifix, and a Muslim boy, he's like a teenager maybe, comes up, picks up the guy's crucifix and says, "This is your God. Why are you dropping your God? You need to set this up as high as you can get it." And so he climbs a tree and puts a crucifix with Christ on it, and he puts it as high as he can get it into the tree. Now, this is a Muslim. Okay, so the media, after the fact, which was what was the biggest lesson learned for us that day, is we walked away from that thing thinking, you know what, these guys were actually pretty cordial, and they also did not believe in Sharia law. They believed in abiding by American philosophy. A lot of these guys did, and I can't speak for them. You can't blanket that statement, but the ones I met did. Anyway, so the media was completely blown out of proportion. You know who Nick Shirley is?
I've heard that name.
I think he's in the news quite a bit lately. He's the one that blew the doors off the Somalian fraud in Minneapolis just recently.
Yep.
So he was there too, and even his post reporting was slanted. It was kind of anti-Muslim to a degree. I'm not saying completely, but it was. So my point is this: is that we buy into this narrative that there's fun, and please understand how I'm using this term. There's fundamentalists in every religion.
Yes,
the fundamentalist Muslims is a danger, really, at its core. But the issue that we have is we buy into the caricature, and everyone's an enemy. Everyone's an enemy when we need to unite under a philosophy, and theology takes a backseat to everything there. I mean, theology is between you and the Lord and your church, and that's about the extent of that.
Yeah. So, anyway. Well, the thing is, every person who wants to control you and manipulate you, if they want to be your superhero, they have to have a supervillain that they're protecting you from. And I've seen Baptist pastors do that, where they when they're trying to, just control people, they just invent these boogeymen that are coming after them, that they scare people. And and there's bad people out there. There are sodomites, and there are evil people, there are racists out there, but most of the people that we come in contact with, that's not a problem. And I'll probably lose my Baptist card for admitting this too. But when I was in Jerusalem last time, and I'm going back in a little over a month, I mean, the Palestinians were very friendly, kind people to me. And I enjoyed being around them. I had videoed the thing on a 360 camera because it was just a cool experience. Unfortunately, the memory card got corrupted. I just set up a 360 camera at the Damascus gate there in Jerusalem. And while I'm just kind of sitting there, I'm eating one night, and I'm just observing everyone, and I'm watching kids play with each other, husbands and wives together, groups of people talking, and just normal, happy people, and they want peace. And so I can actually imagine Muslims wanting to come over to America for religious freedom, because in most Muslim countries, they're always killing each other over their, different beliefs.
Yeah.
Obviously, this was a nut job wing of the IFB world, but I even saw a clip recently. I'm pretty sure this guy wasn't all there, but he like runs a church plant, and he was basically preaching about if he were president, he would be having different people put to death who he just thinks preach a false gospel, and he was even naming Baptists that he would have put to death, and I'm just like,
Uh,
you are insane.
yeah.
And it's
Well, it's a lost philosophy, man.
yeah, yeah. So
The spirit is alive
absolutely,
on both ends.
But yeah, so the thing is, I would, if you actually could get an honest poll about how many Muslims want Sharia law in America, it would probably be a pretty low percentage.
It would
But
be.
everybody who's against Islam, and I'm one of them, but we're always being told they're trying to bring that, and I think that probably is a scare tactic. But and the thing is, our news media and our government, they're always pushing those scare tactics, ultimately to get us to be willing to surrender our liberties. And obviously, we should never be okay with that. But
Yeah.
I do want to ask you about this too, because again, as Baptists, I've got a episode, I haven't even released it yet. It's going to be coming out sometime probably next week. I talk a lot about, I've been doing some podcasts about IFB culture, not so much our doctrine, but just our culture. One of the things that we do culturally, and I've not done this, and I'm not asking you these questions, but typically we're supposed to ask other Baptists when we meet them what Bible college they went to, and you do that to find out what they believe about everything, what kind of Baptists they are, and all that. So,
Yeah.
I'm not going to ask you those questions, but as somebody who identifies independent fundamental Baptist, right? And all that's many of the things associated with it, even though I regularly call out the nonsense and get in trouble for it. But with whatever your perception is of independent fundamental Baptist, are we as old time religion as we think we are? Because, I hear Baptist preachers pretty regularly get up and they'll drop the names of Shubal Stearns and people like that. There were these names, some of these names that you've mentioned from Baptist history, Obadiah Holmes, all that. But do you think we are being loyal to these people, or not being loyal to them necessarily, but should we be trying to identify ourselves if we're right about all the stuff that we do?
Yeah, that's a huge question, because of the fact that everyone's different, and I can tell you my experiences.
This is just your perception.
Yeah, my perception is no.
Okay,
and here's why. Again, theology is different, right? Can you tether it theologically? No. Philosophy is huge. I think the Bible college thing has really stirred up an overreach in autonomy, and has given some platform to people to think they can dictate what goes on in other people's churches. That's part of the thing too, right? Like, if you want to be invited to this meeting, you better change this about whatever you believe. And so it becomes opportunistic as opposed to just wanting and desiring truth. So I speak from my own experiences. I would not call myself an independent fundamental Baptist at all. I would at one time would have said that's what I was. But my experience in the IFB circles has left him. Well, not only this, is I grew up in a group of young people that were a part of that too. And the damage, and I'm not speaking of modern day, and I haven't been a part of that movement in a while, but I would say from the 90s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, early 2000s, that movement really did a lot of damage to a lot of people because of that, the system that it's developed. And I saw it firsthand. I mean, I saw this thing. I mean, you can look, there's documentaries out that the world is putting together to attack IFB. Well, there's a reason for that. Are they slanted? Maybe, but is there truth to them? Yeah, unfortunately, you got to deal with some of those things. That's just the truth. And I think, I would say, again, we're returning to the philosophical mindset of your conscience is yours. You are sovereign in your own right. I am in mine. And we both have to follow our conscience according to the will of God in our own lives. And I am not one to call you out because I'm not better than you. Humility is what's lacking in that. So I don't know, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
exactly what the movement is doing today.
Right. Yeah.
I would,
Well, lacking humility. I always say the problem in the IFB, it's full of pride, which is
mhm,
opposite of that, and insecurity. And
sure.
that is a real problem. Do you think there are any specific doctrines that are popular in the IFB that you don't think reflect historical Baptists?
Give me an example. I don't know. I'd have to hear some of the IFB
Well, I mean,
doctrines today. I
so
think
you know,
they
I've been
reflect to a degree, but
yeah, I've been told too, because like there's guys within the IFB, and of course these are also many of them popish figures who are always trying to speak for all the IFB, who have declared things like the pre-tribulation rapture a fundamental of the faith. They've literally called it the fundamental doctrine. I've been told that that's not a historic Baptist belief. A lot of the Zionist stuff, which is what I get most trouble for.
sure.
I am not a Zionist. I am not pre-trib. And so I regularly get my IFB credentials called into question. Well, you know what? I mean, yes, when you're talking about a lot of the philosophical, behavioral things of the IFB, yeah, I don't fit that. But I
Yeah,
guess I would be fine with that. But I guess, want to identify myself with historical Baptists. And so
yeah.
and
Well,
I've been told too by people that, before the 70s, there was a lot more room for disagreement on that. There really wasn't a clear established eschatology really until the 70s when everybody, bought into the late great planet Earth thief in the night hype.
mhm,
So,
yeah. I think when you're looking at history, you're going to look at, again, what we said earlier. You got to look at the era they were in. What were they trying to figure out?
hmm,
Most of these guys now look at a lot of the guys that we look at in American history came out of the Anglican Church,
hmm,
and they are questioning the Anglican Church basically according to the scriptures. They get the Bible and they say, this is not what my minister. Isaac Backus is one that really stands out to me because he had grown up all his life and the Great Awakening was happening, but he heard all about this salvation. He wanted to experience what salvation was, and so he went to his Anglican minister. He's a young boy. He goes to his Anglican minister and he says, how can I experience this salvation, the fullness of this gospel that everyone's experiencing? I want to feel what God has to offer. And his minister said, he couldn't figure it out, right? They figured God would appoint a time and visit you, and then that would be the time, but he couldn't dictate that. And so he had struggled with just salvation itself, and God gloriously saved him while he was mowing the lawn of all things. He just fell on his knees right there and started to pray out to God. The Holy Spirit drew him. Really cool story. My point in saying that is this: see how the theology, he didn't even know what salvation was, right? And so he is moving from that point into what. Now you got to ask the question. That's what salvation is. That's what a follower of Christ. That's where it begins: is repentance and faith. Now, what in the world is a church? That's what they're trying to figure out. Okay, and so they're building in this over the next 100 years. They're building what in the world is a church, and I don't want to say we've moved past that, but I think to some degree we've stopped pursuing some of those things. Right? They were looking at things like ordinances. The key things is ordinances. It's going to be baptism in the Lord's Supper, church membership. These are the things that they actually struggled with. And so once they understood these things, they kind of locked in. And I think liberty or a freedom to a degree has caused us to now get into a mode where the IFB is today of competing because we want membership, when all they cared is they wanted the truth. And anybody else that wanted the truth would come to that place for it. But instead it's become about numbers, and it's become about building programs, and it's become about all sorts of different things, the ways we can do this, that, or the other, which we've lost the core things what they found, which was, let's just get back to the ordinances. Let's get back to the question of what in the world is the church to begin with. What's our duty as a local New Testament church? So yeah, I think there's a bit of a CEO mindset with pastors these days, and how we can build, and that's not new to this generation. It's in every generation.
No, that's an interesting response to that, and it helps me see too kind of the way you're looking at this too, in distinguishing basically the theology versus the what's the other word? Just the operation,
The philosophy of it is
the
what you're getting at?
philosophy. Yes,
Yeah.
and I guess yeah, that's an interesting distinction you're putting there, because I think the fact too that a lot of our philosophy is wrong, and because we're, in our minds, it's all about the theology. Well, we end up kind of changing our theology to fit a philosophy.
Yeah,
Is what ends
exactly
up
right.
happening. And
Yeah.
Baptists, we're the kings of taking, I should say, IFB, we're kind of the kings of taking a scripture and using eisegesis and just kind of preaching whatever we want, from that
Yeah.
scripture. And yeah, so that's definitely interesting. This is why I love conversations like this, because there's just a lot of stuff that you've said that's got me thinking. The wheels are turning in my head, and it's conversations like this I always have to go back and listen to again, just because I have to kind of chew on some things. And so,
Yeah.
which is why I love talking with Pastor Woody. Whenever I'm talking with him, I would love to just sometime maybe just sit down with him, not recording a podcast. And so instead of trying to concentrate on keeping the conversation flowing, I could really take some time to get bogged down on some specific details, because
Yes.
um,
He's concentrate, and you
yes,
can water it down a little bit, right? Is
yes,
that
yes, it is.
You should come to our camp meeting. That's what you should do, and sit down with them, because you have a whole week and you can just sit and chill with them and eat lunch or whatever. And he's concentrate. So you're like constantly having to bring this back and water it down and parse it out, and then come back.
Yeah, because whenever he's brought up other things in the conversation before, in my brain I'm like, well, wait, hang on a second, because it's like, that's interesting, and
Mhm.
so it makes me think a bunch of other stuff, but it's like I'm trying to stay focused on the subject. And so,
Yeah.
and one of the things I've learned from doing this program is that much of our what we call doctrine and theology is based on speculation. And what I have observed is, especially with prophecy, there are things that are very difficult to understand. But what we all tend to do is we tend to speculate on those things.
Mhm.
Well, what ends up happening, we speculate from the pulpit, and I think that's okay as long as we let everybody know we're speculating. But sometimes we end up agreeing in our as a group about our speculation, where we're all speculating the same thing, and then it becomes doctrine. And so
Yeah.
then somebody comes along who maybe has a different position slightly on something, and they might be right. They might even be wrong. But then, what they're saying conflicts with our speculation. And it takes time when you hear something like that to process that and say, wait a minute, is my thinking based on a speculation of something else being right? Or is this actual doctrine? And I'm always trying to sort that out of my mind.
Yeah.
Things that I believe, is it because of clear scripture, or is it based on speculation? There's other passages too that I'm open to different possibilities. Melchizedek, who he was.
Mhm.
I can preach it either way. That it was Jesus or somebody else, right? I can preach it either way. The thing is, though, either position you take causes you to speculate on other things.
Yeah.
And so there's been times I've heard people say something, and my immediate instinct is that's wrong, because but it's like, well, wait a minute. No, that's actually speculation, based on something I'm not even real sure about. So I'm not
Yeah.
going to divide over that. But Baptists, independent fundamental Baptists, we divide over everything. That's how we show how strong we are. Everything's a
Yeah.
fundamental.
It's tribal. It's tribal to a degree, right?
Yeah.
You get your different flavors. I think what you're referring to is the danger of that is obviously our kids, because speculation turns into inherited certainty, which turns into a new age dogma. Right. And so there's an adherence to a belief that maybe I don't remember, but that's what, so-and-so used to say. And that's what I'm going to stick to. And so there's a humility that needs in all scripture and everything that we study. There's got to be humility. Otherwise, our kids are going to inherit a lot of confusion on every front. I think one of the big things that we look at is the separation of church and state theory right? We kind of get that backwards, and like, what are we supposed to do? And church is not supposed to preach politics or what have you. And that's kind of inherited through confusion. We don't understand what that actually means. And so what are our kids inheriting? Not only the theological standpoint, but the philosophical standpoint. We've got to ask these questions and look at them very seriously.
Right.
And we can look at history and we can see successful communities. Our nation at the beginning, when it was like trying to figure these things out, you have a conscience and I have a conscience. You were made in the image of God. I was created in the image of God. So therefore we're both on a path to seek him.
Well, yeah. If I've gotten anything out of this conversation so far, what I'm liking the most about what I'm hearing, we have a saying I do in this program all the time, and that is, we don't have all the answers, but we're not afraid to find out what they are. And the reason I say that all the time is because as independent fundamental Baptists, we tend to operate as though we do have all the answers and we are not budging on anything. And I think it's that attitude that's locked people into a lot of foolishness on stuff that I think you can clearly show is wrong. So the thing that I'm hearing from you that I like is that these old time Baptists, they were learning. They were figuring things out. They didn't have a we know it all, we have arrived attitude. No, they were a work in progress, which is what I think we're supposed to be as an individual. And I think also in the scriptures, you can take some of those applications and those scriptures, and they're probably actually, while we apply them to us as an individual, and that's not wrong, I think probably the primary interpretation of those things is he's speaking, as a church, that we're always supposed to be growing, developing. And we've just had this mentality somewhere we arrived and we're just kind of as a church. And now we're just waiting for the big apostasy to come.
Yeah, there's safety in denominations.
Yes,
there is. And so let's remove the denominations and let's get down to the heart and the conscience of a man, and how much does he actually want to know the truth? That's a serious question to ask. But yeah, you're right, 100%. We get into safety of denominations. Well, if we remove some of these things, well, I'm a Baptist, bless God. I have a heritage, blah 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 blah. I think we're missing some of the most important aspects of being a follower of Christ, and that is the following part of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that is the most genuine. Realistically, that's what history is full of, is men like that. Were they all Baptists? No, not at all. Were many of the ones that sought religious liberty Baptists? Yeah, that's a fact. Like, you can't deny that. Can you tether yourself to most of them theologically? Probably not. That's where we got to take it for what it is giving us, and before we lose it. And we've already been losing it. This country's forgotten its true origin, and that's the sad part about our history.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to keep you forever, but I guess in closing, what are some good resources for learning about Baptist history, or even just old time Baptist doctrine? Are there any books that you recommend or anything like that?
Well, I'm a liberty guy, right? So I'm that's kind of been my heartbeat, and I think that's the most essential part about this. Go to AmericanProvidenceFoundation.com and sign up. I think if you can go there, put your email and sign up, we are going to be releasing materials for free that they're going to help pastors teach their churches about their responsibilities in government in America. Big. We want to dismantle the idea of the fake wall thing. That's one thing. I would highly recommend going to Archive. I think it's called archive.org. Are you familiar with that site? I think it's archive.org. Yeah. Go there. There are so many works that you can read on Leland, Backus. Those are a couple of the really strong names. I would go to look at Roger Williams. He's another one I'd look at philosophically, not theologically. But those are some of the key works. The writings of Isaac Backus are huge if you want to understand America and its developmental stages. Isaac Backus, if we didn't have him, and John Leland, I don't know what we'd do. But those are the things I would mainly focus on. Again, theologically, we've been developing this entire time, so it's hard to pinpoint one person that had it all right.
Okay. So. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about this too, just briefly. In recent years, I've heard a lot of criticism towards the Trail of Blood and it not being a good resource. That's something I read years ago. I always heard it referred to. Do you think that that is a good resource and that it's, something people should use?
Yeah, I question every historian anyway. I would highly recommend always find a third, always verify, always verify. Um, the Martyr's Mirror has been my favorite. If you're
Okay.
going to go through the martyrdom route, Martyr's Mirror is probably one of the best books you can get on that. I don't know if you've ever seen that book.
Mm-mm.
Dude, this man, if I showed it to you, you'd be flabbergasted how fine the printing is, how thick it is. It's a huge volume of martyrdom. It goes from the apostles down through the ages to this. I believe it stops in the late 1500s.
Hmm.
Phenomenal stories in there that break your heart. Letters that you don't even know how they preserved these things. So as far as an alternative, I can't speak to Fox's. You said Fox's, right? I can't speak to that. But
Or no, not Fox's Book of Martyrs, but
Trail of Blood.
Trail of Blood, yeah.
Yeah, Trail of Blood. D.B. Ray's Baptist Succession. I think that's another one. That's another one you could look at. That would be potentially the same thing.
Okay.
So, a lot of good books. J.T. Christian. Go find J.T. Christian. He's one that really defended successionism. So that might be a help to someone watching as well.
Well, all right. Well, no, I definitely enjoyed this conversation, and I would encourage everybody watching this. I will have the links. I have the links in the description for his YouTube channel and also the websites he referred to. And definitely go check out some of that work. And I'm looking forward to seeing some of these projects you're working on. And I'm looking forward to going, and I plan on watching the Red Herring. I'm interested in that. And then and send me those links. I'll do a documentary review on the one. I haven't done any of those in a while, and I love documentaries. They're a lot of fun.
Well, you'll love these, man. Absolutely. I appreciate you taking the time for that.
All right. Well, I appreciate it very much. Do you have any final words for our audience?
American Providence Foundation.com. Sign up. We'll get you materials. We'll empower your family. Our goal is to take from the archives to your living room and teach every family the origin of religious liberty and how we can help the future defend it.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you, audience, for watching this. I hope you will like it, share it, and definitely go check out his videos and his website. And let's learn about. We shouldn't be afraid of our history. We ought to want to remember these things and learn these things. And appreciate the sacrifices people made, the things that they. A lot of things we take for granted. I don't think there's any. I think there's only benefits to studying these things, and so I hope you will look more into it. So I appreciate everybody watching this. Thank you, and we will see y'all next time. God bless.